Hey there, Kate here with Tested, not from home for once. Today I'm going to be doing a video of Halloween stuff that you can do at home. I picked some things that could be a little more accessible and don't necessarily need a whole lot of pre-existing skills or learning. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is these are some creepy hands. I saw something like this online and I really like the idea of having some creepy hands either on a board, maybe looking like they're coming up out of the ground, great photo op behind you. And it turns out that they sell some really easy to use kits. So a kit like this comes with everything you need to make the mold and the casting. It is safe to use. You put your hand in it, it doesn't hurt you. It cleans up relatively easily, and the whole process takes about 2 hours for one hand. So if you want to make multiples, you might need multiple kits, but otherwise it's pretty easy to do. Let's take a look. All right. Inside the kit, it comes with, obviously, instructions, which are great. These are really easy to follow, and everything's super precise down to the exact milliliter amount of water you need for each step. And handy dandy, we've got our 2 separate packets. One is for the mold. This is the alginate mix, and you will mix that straight into this bucket. The other is the plaster mix, already measured out, that I use a separate container for. And the best of all, this is what you put your hand into to make a mold. It's the exact right height. Some other buckets like this are just a little too short. If you want to get up to that wrist point, you need to have a bit of a taller one. So perfect that it comes right with it. Now, alginate is a human-safe molding material. Dentists use it. That's really the most experience I ever had with it as a material, is that dentists use it a lot. It is soft and flexible, not too dissimilar to silicone, but it really is only intended to be a temporary mold, meaning after a little while, the mold itself will dry out and won't be, able to be reused. Also, the intended purpose of this mold is once you do your casting in it, the way you demold it is to just rip the mold off of it. So you destroy your mold in the demolding process. I have found a way to try and reuse the mold to get at least one more pull, sometimes 2, out of the same mold. It's up to you whether it's worth it or not. The plaster is really great because this is something that almost everybody's used. Kids use it in school. Plaster of Paris. It's the exact same stuff. It's relatively non-toxic. Obviously, it's got some silica in it, and you don't want to get any of that in your eyes or mouth or anything. But for the most part, touching your skin isn't the worst. It's super easy to get more if you run out. I went ahead and bought a separate container of just regular old plaster of Paris, and this way I could do multiple pours in the same mold because, like I said, this one comes with just the exact amount you need for one casting. All right, first up, we are going to mix this mold. So again, this is the alginate, something that you want to do. It's just like with a cooking show. Timing is everything when you're working with materials that can kick. So having your water already with you, pre-measured out, having your stir stick ready, making sure that you're ready to start molding immediately. Because the way this works is I mix the alginate with the water in the bucket. I mix it for a minute, and then I immediately have to stick my hand in there and sit for 3 minutes. Also make sure that you have a comfortable place to do it. Something that I found is that, say I try to do it right here, if I'm molding my hand, you can see I've got a bit of a bend here. If I really want to make sure that I'm getting it, I need to have a straight hand. So I found that putting the bucket on the floor makes it easier. I can lean over it, get a good, comfortable position as well, because this hurts after 3 minutes. All right, what I'm going to do first is pour in my water. They call out, I want to say 1,500 milliliters, which comes out to 1.5 liters. Pour the water in first. Next up, I'm going to mix in my powder. Now in the instructions it says to try and stir it as you pour it in. Think of it as, you know, like when you're baking and you're slowly adding your dry ingredients in. You don't want it to all clump up, so you start stirring as you go. Also worth noting, this mixture will remain lumpy looking. It will not be perfectly smooth. Don't worry, it's supposed to be lumpy. They also recommend in the instructions that you do a sort of butter churning motion like this. It's a lot more up and down as opposed to a spiral around. But I like to make sure that I'm scraping the bottom and the sides as I go, just to make sure all those pockets are getting hit. I'm going to start a timer for 1 minute to make sure that it gets all mixed up and try and break up as many clumps as possible. They also recommend squishing the bag before you pour it out so that in case there are any hard clumps, you've broken those up a bit. This looks like some very gross, flavorless oatmeal. The resulting consistency you want to aim for is like a really thick paste, pretty much what you're seeing here. It's not going to change too much. It's really more about making sure there aren't any pockets of dry powder. You want it to be as liquid as possible. Oh, and there is my timer. All right, now that I'm ready, I'm going to scrape my stick off. Set this down. Change my timer to 3 minutes. And then get into position. Does feel pretty gross. Now the trick is finding a position you can get into where your fingers are not touching the bottom or the sides. And then, most importantly, don't move. If you move your fingers too much, it's not going to set right. Also try and keep an eye out, or I guess a feel out, to make sure you feel that it's completely surrounding your fingers. You want to make sure there's no air pockets where the stuff didn't surround you. It's really interesting feeling as you're sitting here. It goes from feeling like, you know, like oatmeal that's all squishy around you to slowly feeling more like Jell-O, where it still has a give to it, but it's definitely got more of a solid background, or you can tell that it's not shifting as much as a liquid would. It's a little cool, especially because you're not supposed to use hot water. That makes it set faster. I suppose you could use hot water if you wanted it to set faster, but they recommend sitting in a position with your hand in water to acclimate the temperature. I think some people get rather cold doing this, but it's not ice water. I'm doing all right. So this one's interesting because whereas when the plaster kicks, it lets off quite a lot of heat. This is not changing in temperature at all. It maintains whatever the temperature the water was. But there's a reason why they caution you against using plaster to mold a body part, because the heat that it gives off is so intense it could burn your skin. Okay, my timer is up, and one of the things you want to do just to make sure that it really did set is take your finger and push on the top of the mold. If it's not sticky, which it's not, it feels bouncy and a little wet, but nothing is sticking to my finger, that means it is set. So one of the first things you do is start to just slowly wiggle your fingers like so. You're gonna kind of get a feel for it. You're gonna hear some funny suction sounds as you break free from the suction of it. And then as you loosen up, you wanna try and just slide out. Ta-da! And as you see, there's actually very minimal stuff left on my hands afterwards. They do recommend you just wash up your hands real quick, but otherwise you've got a really nice set mold right here. All right, now what they recommend is you immediately jump into the next step of mixing the plaster, pouring it in. So we've got our plaster here already pre-measured, thankfully. Now, the trick with plaster, if you've never worked with it before, is you always add the plaster to the water. You don't add the water to the plaster. So I have my water pre-measured out. I'm going to put that in this mixing container. Then I'm going to get my plaster ready. Actually, first, a good technique or a good tip, I need to have my mixing stick ready. I'm going to use the same stick Luckily, the alginate comes right off, so no problem there. Now, be careful as you pour this. I have had experience having it splash up into my face. Not fun, having to rinse your eyes for a long time. So go slow, no splashes. They recommend holding a little bit of plaster back for any repairs you'll need later. I feel confident, so I'm not going to do it, but I will show you how to make a little repair. I found that this amount of plaster is a bit more than what you need really for the hand. So if you have anything you want to cast up, have it ready and standing by, and you can pour it in. Plaster usually lasts for about, on the box they recommend 7 to 10 minutes. Honestly, I'd be surprised if you got that long. Play it by ear, but go fast. Once you're sure everything's mixed well, again, checking the sides and bottoms, making sure there's not any clumps, you can begin pouring. This is going to be very messy, so make sure you cover your workstation and don't wear nice clothes. All right. Now the way you want to do this is in steps, especially because, like I said, I had to curl my fingers a bit. So what we're going to do is pour in a little bit, just a bit like that. Set your bucket down, take this, and make sure all that little bit of plaster goes into your fingertips. Roll it around, help try to get any air bubbles out. And this is what we're going to do multiple times, just a little at a time. The biggest thing you want to look out for is air bubbles. So keeping it at an angle like this, doing lots of tapping on the table. You can see some little air bubbles start to come up. And this is general mold making techniques. Anytime you're pouring something, you want to make sure you're doing it in a way where the air can get out and doesn't cause any big cavities. You can see all these little air bubbles on the surface. Those would normally be trapped in the hand and making voids. So making sure to bounce them and get them out is what your aim is. For the most part, I try not to fill it too much past the opening. Obviously, you don't need all this plaster on top. If your mold is at an angle like it is, there's not much you can do about it. You're gonna get some plaster that falls out and around. I try and spread it out a little bit so at least your flashing, as we call it, isn't too thick. You'll easily be able to break that off when you take it out of the mold. Last little bits of pats here. All right, now because I want these hands to have bolts in them so I can mount them to a board, I have to do that while it's wet. So what I did is I took a board, I drilled a hole, and this is really genius. It was a suggestion to me. In order to make the bolt long enough, I'm going to attach a little nut there. Don't screw it all the way. Then attach your next bolt to it. Boom. Instantly longer, and because of this nut on top, if I need to shorten it at all, I can just unscrew it backwards. All right, I'm gonna now drop this bolt into here and hopefully it will register into the casting. There you go. Watch it sink. Want to make sure it's away from the edges, and then once it's in there, I like to shake it up again, make sure the plaster really attaches to the edges there. All right, that should be good. I'm gonna set this aside, and with all this extra plaster I have, I'm going to pour some into some extra molds I have, and then also do a little repair. So here I have a hand, and just the very tip of the finger broke off before. These fingers can be fragile. So a repair that I can do quite easily is just take this finger and dip it in the remaining plaster. It makes a bit of a glue. Then I apply that back onto the hand. There. There we go. All right, here I have some silicone molds that I got at Michael's and at a hobby shop. I like to pour all my extra material into something when I can so as not to waste it. So I'm going to pour some of this extra plaster into these, and then that will populate some extra greeblies for future projects. So as you can see, it's starting to set. It got really thick. I'm going to use this stick to smooth it out. Again, try and get as much excess off as you can so that you're not having to deal with that later. And try and get out any air bubbles. As always, air bubbles are the things you have to worry about. So the way plaster works is you usually start to feel it all happen at once at the end. So it goes from kind of workable to, oh crap, I don't have any time left. So this last mold here I really like. It's actually a landscape mold. So when you pull your part out at the end, it will look like a rock face. These are invaluable and super versatile. You can use them in any situation, paint it a different color. Always looks good. Let's see if I have enough. I can feel the heat from the plaster, which, as we talked about before, plaster puts off quite a lot of heat as it kicks. All right, I have reached my 7-minute mark and can no longer work with any of the remaining plaster. I'm happy to say we used all of the plaster that I mixed up. So again, it's a good idea if you know you're gonna have some extra, have something around. You know, it's always good to make use of it. These will be used sometime in the future by me, I'm sure, and I'll be happy I made them. Now, time to wait. The hand will take about an hour and a half to 2 hours before you can demold it. So best to start cleaning up and do whatever you want while you wait. All right, now it definitely hasn't been 2 hours yet, but I know that the plaster has set up a bit. So what I'm gonna do is remove this top board. All you have to do is unscrew your top bolt. Boom. One of my nut came off right there. Now the reason for this is, as we talked about, plaster lets off heat, and it has a bit of an air dry component to it. So the most air you can get in and letting it off gas on its own, the better. So remove that, set it aside, let this keep going. Now what I'm gonna do is show you, so this is a not so pretty casting. As I said, the alginate is really only meant for one casting. I've been stretching it. This is a much desired second pull from that mold, but it didn't go so well. I had to really cut up the alginate mold to get it out, and as you could see, there's just tons of lines, tons of gross stuff, and as I started to clean it up, I went, wait a minute, the one word I would use to describe this casting is creepy, so why not go with it? So what I'm gonna do now is give it a wash of some black gouache and give it a real good gray pallor and really kick up the creepiness. All right, this is some black gouache, and all gouache is basically like a watercolor that's more opaque. So I'm taking some black gouache, I'm gonna put it into a little cup here. And I'm gonna use this a bit like a wash. You know, we've done washes before on here. So I wanna get a little bit of black on the brush, but not too heavy. You know, I'm not trying to paint this black. I just wanna do a wash. So just enough that it's on there. I have some water. I'm gonna get my brush pretty wet so it's a bit drippy like that. Have a rag handy and start going over parts of the hand. Now, anywhere that you think it's too dark, get your brush wet again, put the water over that area, start to wipe it off. Let's see. You want to be careful not to get anything too wet because it is plaster, so it could reactivate a little bit, but for the most part, this hand is a few days old. It'll keep. Now, because the plaster is so dry, you're gonna find that it really sucks up anything you put on it. It's very absorbent. So you wanna move kind of quickly to try and mop anything up, but like I said, you can reactivate it with water. It won't be a big deal if you need to pull some of that back off. Something you wanna be careful of here is these fingers can be rather fragile, right? Like dried plaster is a bit brittle in places. So try not to hold your piece by the finger if you can. Just be gentle as you go. You should be good. So something that's really great is that this wash isn't just providing color, but it's providing definition. As you can see, a lot of these small fine lines and wrinkles from the hands are being brought out. So it feels a lot more detailed now, even though obviously I haven't changed the casting. You can just see everything much better. All right, I'm gonna call this one done. As always, it's kind of hard to know when you're aging or when you're putting a wash on something when you're done. But the fact is, I know I don't want this to be solidly black, and I don't want to lose any of the details that I'm picking up. So I tried to do just enough that you can see some of those details, but you can also still see the light color coming in from underneath. And I am very happy with this. I think it looks creepy and gross and just made for Halloween. All right, it's been 2 hours. This thing is set. If you are at all worried, just try testing the top of it. It should be relatively hard. There might be a little bit of markings with your fingernail, but for the most part, you can tell it's solid. This doesn't mean you can be willy-nilly with it, throw it all around. You still want to be gentle, but it's good to pull. So first step is gently pull at the edges, right? You want to try and break the seal that is happening around the sides of the mold. So if you feel that loosening up now, very gently again, flip it. Oop, here we go. There it is. The sides of the mold will be wet. This alginate tends to give off some moisture. Now, as the instructions tell you, they say just rip apart the mold. But since this is something that I've been trying to reuse some of the molds, I've been trying to cut them in half, but not all the way. I want it to still register right. So I take a knife. I like these kind because I can get a longer blade going with it. Basically what you want to do is try and run this along the edge, and you want to make sure that your blade is always in contact with the plaster. That's how you know you're cutting along the edge. You want to make sure to always be trying to register with that. So basically try and find your thumb and your pinky, and that's where you want to cut against. If you notice the hands start to move with a curve, try and follow that. Oh, I think I've found my, what is this, a pinky or a thumb? It's a pinky. All right, now see here, I haven't cut all the way to the bottom. I still want it to register a little bit. That'll make reusing it easier, but I've found my finger going all the way down like that. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Try and follow my thumb. Also try not to dig too deep with your blade. It could mark your plaster cast. All right. Now I want to try and loosen this up a bit. Again, don't pull too hard. The alginate is very fragile, so you could easily just rip the whole thing apart. Now I'm going to try and get a good grip by the base and start to sort of wiggle it free. Let's see. Again, I had to curve my fingers a little bit, so it's going to want to hold on there. Literally gripping it with my own fingers. Again, be very careful with the fingers themselves on the plaster. That's going to want to snap off. And there we go. Ooh, yeah. Something I really like about the alginate is it picks up all the details, every little line and texture on the skin. So that's a good looking hand right there. All right. Now, if you want to recast, take this, try and re-register the edges just as good as you can. Stick it right back in the bucket. You might want to check inside, make sure everything's registering again, just how you want it, but otherwise, try and recast right away. The faster you do it, the better. I don't know how many days you'll get out of this alginate, but best bet is to just get as much as possible right in the beginning. Now, these extra molds that I poured, let's pop some of those out. See our little plaster greeblies. These are perfect. Can't you just see these going onto a spaceship or an AT-AT? So always good to utilize any extra material you have. Ooh, I'm liking this rockscape. Again, be careful not to crack the plaster. Nice. So there you go. That's a really nice piece of landscape, saved for future use. And now I'm going to take my hands, mount them on a board, and have a really cool photo backdrop. All right, here we have it. I have mounted all of my hands to this board using those bolts that I put in the back. Obviously, this would make a very good photo backdrop if you mount it on the wall. You could put it flat and have a bunch of dirt and stuff around it, and it looks like the hands are coming out of the ground at you. There's really a lot of different use cases for this. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you make some of these. Please let me know if you do. Have a very spooky Halloween.